Hey everybody, welcome to DadsDen of Pop Culture. I'm doing a little role-playing game deep dive. This is something I've wanted to do for a while. To go through some of these old rules, and this is the oldest D&D rules I have. I don't have the little beige books, little white box, whatever terms you like to use. But this is the oldest thing I have. But I think it's a good place to start because a couple things I notice about discussions of Dungeons and Dragons online. One, of course, is that it is sometimes unnecessarily antagonistic or kind of absolutist. And this is a game. We're supposed to be having some fun playing it, getting together with people. Don't really need to be, declaring holy war on one another because of, whether we like Thaco or not. The other is, though, a lot of people don't really seem to understand what Dungeons and Dragons is. They expect it to be able to duplicate whatever happens to be in their mind at the time. And if it doesn't do it well, then the rules are broken and the rules need to change. And that's another big thing. I want to modify this. I want to modify that. I want to modify the other. Have you tried the rules more or less as they're written first? Because if you're going to start playing around with a game and changing things, you need to have a really good grasp of how everything fits together so that you're not introducing changes that are going to throw the rest of the game out of whack. Either way. So I thought it'd be useful, and I'm by no means some massive expert or authority on this subject. I'm just a dude who started playing when he was 12, which surprisingly enough, that's the age you're supposed to be playing at, 12 and above. And I just played for a long time under various rule systems. But I think over the years, I've kind of gained at least some understanding about what they were aiming for and what they were trying to do. So I thought it'd be fun to kind of take a deep dive and look at it. So this is the D&D basic set with introductory module, written by John Eric Holmes. So it's oftentimes called Holmes Basic or Holmes D&D. Now the basic set would later be redone by Tom Moldvay, and we will look at that in the future. This was sort of a compilation and cleaning up of those original D&D rules. And it covers levels 1 through 3 of characters, so low level. And it says in there, when you're ready to move on, you move on to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. And we'll look at that as well. So let's crack this bad boy open. First of all, though, let's look at that art. Very evocative. And look, this is important too, right? Because again, you can't build a game that can simulate absolutely everything. D&D is kind of gonzo fantasy. It borrows from a lot of different fantasy worlds and books and ideas, movies, etc. But at its heart, treasure, monster, adventurers. And they're inside a dungeon, a cavern system. We're going to just call them dungeons. That's Dungeons and Dragons. Now, you can use the engine within this to do other things. No doubt about it. But that's what it's really designed for. And it is a game. It is a game. So there's a lot of gamist elements in it that are not necessarily meant to represent perfect reality, which would be hard to represent since, it's set in a time period, sort of, the Middle Ages, that none of us have lived through. So let's crack this open. Let's look at the contents. So we have our rule book, and this is what we're going to be focusing on. Now you see this one still has its chits intact. You go, what on earth were these for? Well, 1 through 20, 1 through 20, 1 through 4. The 1 through 6 is kind of interesting since we did have normal 6-sided dice. 1 through 8, 1 through 10, 1 through 10, different colors, 1 through 12. These are your dice. No, you weren't supposed to cut them out and fold them into something. You were supposed to cut these out, and you would put them in like a hat or something, and somebody would pull out the number. Why did they do that? Because when this was being sold, those special dice that we're so used to now weren't available, or weren't readily available. Now, they soon would be. And so, nice that this thing didn't get cut up. But that's what that's for. And we have, of course, also the module, the Keep on the Borderlands, the classic. I love that cover. I love this module. Now, this is copyright 1980. This book originally comes out. Put these back in here. There we go. So I'm not folding anything. Now, this book, you'll notice, copyright 1974 and 77 and 78. And this is third edition from December of 1979. So by the time this particular set was out, you probably had those special dice available, and that's why they didn't have to, cut those little chits out and use them that way. So what do we got? Dungeons & Dragons. Rules for fantastic medieval role-playing adventure game campaigns. Playable with paper and pencil and miniature figures by Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson. Edited by Eric Holmes for Jeff and Chris. Distributed yada, yada, yada. Then there's the old Wizard logo. TSR Hobbies Incorporated, Post Office Box 756, Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, 53147. All right. Now, we're going to roll through this pretty quickly, but preface, and I think there's some value to this, so we're going to read through it. This book is based upon the original work published in 1974 and 3 supplementary booklets published in the 2-year period after the initial release of Dungeons & Dragons. It is aimed solely at introducing the reader to the concepts of fantasy role-playing and the basic play of this game. To this end, it limits itself to basics. The rules contained herein allow only for the first 3 levels of player progression, and instructions for the game referee, the dungeon master, are kept to the minimum necessary to allow him to conduct basic games. This is absolutely necessary because the game is completely open-ended, is subject to modification, expansion, and interpretation according to the desires of the group participating, and is in general not bounded by the conventional limitations of other types of games. So yes, you are meant to mess around with these things a little bit. You just are. We wish to extend our sincere thanks to the following individuals who helped make this possible through their idea contributions: Brian Bloom, Ernie Gygax, Tim Kask, Jeff Key, Rob Kuntz, Terry Kuntz, Alan Lucian, Steve Marsh, Mike Mornard, and Jim Ward. Okay, nice little preface, but it lays it out for you, what this thing is meant to be. I'm going to read this last paragraph here. This is from the foreword from the original edition of the game. These rules are strictly fantasy. Those wargamers who lack imagination, those who don't care for Burroughs' Martian adventures where John Carter is groping through the black pits, who feel no thrill upon reading Howard's Conan saga, who do not enjoy the De Camp and Pratt fantasies, or Fritz Leiber's Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser pitting their swords against evil sorceries, will not be likely to find Dungeons & Dragons to their taste. But those whose imaginations know no bounds will find that these rules are the answer to their prayers. With this last bit of advice, we invite you to read on and enjoy a world where the fantastic is fact and magic really works. E. Gary Gygax, TSR Hobbies Incorporated, 1 November 1973, Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. So I would have been about 1 year old when this first came out. All right, we get a table of contents. So I'm not going to read every paragraph in this book. We're just not going to do that because, by golly, we don't have time. Although, who knows? Maybe that would actually be a little bit of fun. Let's see if we can get a little better light. There we go. Okay. So it does give you a description here. Fantastic, exciting, and imaginative game of role-playing for adults 12 years and up. Each player creates a character or characters who may be dwarves, elves, halflings, or human fighting men, magic users, pious clerics, or wily thieves. The characters are then plunged into an adventure in a series of dungeons, tunnels, secret rooms, and caverns run by another player, the referee often called the Dungeon Master. The dungeons are filled with fearsome monsters, fabulous treasure, and frightful perils. As the players engage in game after game, their characters grow in power and ability. The magic users learn more magic spells. The thieves increase in cunning and ability. The fighting men, halflings, elves, and dwarves fight with more deadly accuracy and are harder to kill. Soon the adventurers are daring to go deeper and deeper into the dungeons on each game, battling more terrible monsters and, of course, recovering bigger and more fabulous treasure. Okay, kind of lays it out for you again. This is what we're trying to simulate in this game. Doesn't mean you can't use it for other things, but that's what it's actually for. So keep that in mind. That's the game of Dungeons and Dragons, and it's pretty damn fun. Game requires at least 2 players, one of whom is the Dungeon Master and has prepared the dungeon, the set of dice, pencil, and paper for keeping records and maps, and optionally a tabletop to represent the locality of the adventurers with some form of markers for the characters and the monsters they encounter. And notice that is optional by this point. You didn't need to actually have miniatures for this. Read this whole book through, except for the sample dungeon section at the end. After one player has been chosen to be Dungeon Master, he or she should then read through the description of the sample dungeon. All right, so step 1, as with most of these things, we are creating characters. There are 6 basic abilities for each character, and I think most of us who play D&D know what those are. Strength, intelligence, wisdom, constitution, dexterity, and charisma. All right, there's a reason they're in that order. 3 of these abilities are really only prime requisites for particular classes. All right, strength, fighter, intelligence for the magic user, wisdom for the cleric. And by this time, we've added dexterity for the thief. But initially, those 3 were grouped together at the top because of what they were intended for. Constitution, dexterity, charisma were at the bottom. They didn't give you a bonus to your earned experience points like a prime requisite could, but they gave you other sort of special abilities. Now, by the time you get to Moldvay's set, they've moved dexterity up, constitution down, because now strength, intelligence, wisdom, and dexterity are prime requisites. Okay. Now, I mean, that was true here too, but they hadn't changed the order. And this is something to think about now, because we say each player starts a character by rolling 3 6-sided dice for each characteristic. 18 is as high as one can get with 3 dice, so a character with a strength of 18 would be super powerful. One with a strength of 3, lowest possible dice roll, would barely be able to lift his sword off the ground. So this is kind of important, because a lot of people nowadays will complain about ability scores. They need to be higher, 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 higher. Okay. They didn't need to be back then because, frankly, they didn't do that much. Over the years, the ability scores have been tied to things in so many different ways that if you don't have really high abilities and therefore good ability bonuses, you're kind of screwed, or at least you feel like you're kind of screwed. Honestly, even in 3rd edition, I played characters with like really crappy scores, and it's fine. If you just kind of know what you're doing, you can get through. But it just wasn't quite as important. So we get little descriptions here. Strength is obviously important for fighters and is considered the prime requisite for that class. Okay. The score of 9 to 12 is average. Intelligence is the prime requisite for magic users. Since there are advantages to the magic user if his intelligence is 13 or higher, any character with such a score should be considered for this class. Wisdom, prime requisite for clerics. Okay, now let's get to these next 3 because they're a little more important. Constitution is a combination of health and endurance. It will influence how a character can withstand being paralyzed or killed and raised from the dead, etc. In addition, dwarves and halflings have strong constitutions, and a character should have a constitution greater than 9 to be a dwarf or a halfling. Dexterity applies to speed and accuracy. Characters with high dexterity can get off the first arrow, throw the first spell, or draw a weapon and strike the first blow. Dexterity is the prime requisite for thieves, and scores of 13 and over in this ability make the character a good candidate for the thief class. Halflings are also noted for their dexterity with weapons, and a character should have a dexterity greater than 9 to be a halfling. And then we get charisma. Now, this is one of the scores that has sort of been neglected over the years, although they've added other things to it by the time we're getting into later editions. But this was a very important score in the early game because of some of the assumptions that were made. Remember, this is branching off of wargaming and the idea of having a bunch of soldiers, right? So charisma is a combination of appearance, personality, sex appeal, and so forth. Its most important aspect is leadership. A character of charisma below 13 cannot hire more than 5 followers, and their loyalty will be lukewarm at best. That is, if the fighting gets hot, there is a good probability they will run away. On the other hand, someone with a charisma of 18 can win over a large number of followers, men or monsters, who will probably stand by him to the death. Also, a female with high charisma will not be eaten by a dragon, but kept captive. Now, okay, that comes back to folklore and that kind of stuff. A charismatic male defeated by a witch will not be turned into a frog, but kept enchanted as her lover, and so forth. Okay, but the point here is you were expected to bring followers, men-at-arms, that kind of thing, down into the dungeon to help with the fighting. So when you say, well, I mean, the fighters may only have 5 hit points. They can only take a couple hits. Well, 5 hit points for him, but he maybe has 2 or 3 people with him, right? That's kind of the idea here. And over the years, as that aspect has been neglected, people start going, the game's broken. It's not working. Game's not broken. You're just not playing the game. Now, of course, there's nothing wrong with doing it differently, but just understand why it was done that way initially. Okay. Table of bonus and penalties due to abilities. This table summarizes and adds to the description of the abilities given above, and it lets you know that some of these things you're not going to understand right off the bat, but they're going to explain them later. So let's look at this. So a prime requisite of 15 or more, add 10% to earned experience. A prime requisite of 13 to 14, add 5% to earned experience. Prime requisite of 9 to 12, no bonus. Prime requisite of 7 to 8, subtract 10% from earned experience. Prime requisite of 6 or less, subtract 20% from earned experience. In other words, if your character's weak, don't become a fighter. You're not going to advance that quickly as a fighter. Okay. Getting that bonus essentially means that at times, let's say you have a bonus and nobody else does, all other things being equal, you're going to be a level ahead of everybody. Now, maybe not for a really long period of time, maybe only for an adventure or two, but for an adventure or two, you're ahead of everybody else, which is kind of cool. Okay. Constitution of 18, add 3 to each hit die. Constitution of 17, add 2 to each hit die. Constitution of 15 to 16, add 1 to each hit die. Now you'll notice in later editions, you're going to get those bonuses at lower levels of Constitution. Here, to get that stuff, you got to be really, really stout. Constitution of 6 or less, subtract 1 from each hit die, but never less than 1. In other words, you don't have 0 hit points if you're rolling that. Dexterity, 13 or more, fire any missile at +1. Dexterity of 8 or less, fire any missile at -1. Well, what about rolling for initiative? Well, we'll get to that later. It's done a little bit differently. What about other things? What about strength giving me a bonus to damp? No. It doesn't, but it will make you advance more quickly as a fighter. And of course, as you advance as a fighter, you'll get better at some of those things. All right. Adjusting ability scores, which means, yes, you can do this. It is possible to raise a character's scores in a prime requisite by lowering the scores of some of the other abilities. This recognizes that one can practice and learn feats of fighting, intelligence, etc., but must take a penalty in other areas by so doing. Magic users and clerics can reduce their strength scores by 3 points and add 1 to their prime requisite for every 3. Now, that's a big thing. So the initial rolls of the dice for your character are very important. This is not a game that's designed for you to handcraft the character you're playing. Part of the fun here is When you start, you don't know what you're going to end up with. Now, you're going to find a lot of fantasy books, and you're going to see this in the D&D cartoon and things like that. The idea of people from the real world traveling into a fantasy world, right? And you don't know what you're going to be when you get there. That's kind of carried over here a little bit. So, yes, if you let's say you make yourself a magic user, and you had like say a 15 intelligence. That's pretty good. And you had a 12 strength. Okay. Well, you go, 12 strength doesn't give me any bonuses as a magic user. Doesn't matter if I lower it, really. Okay. Well, I can take it down by 3 to 9, and in no case can any ability be lowered below 9. And then I can add 1 to my intelligence, so bring it up to a 16, and that's going to be better for me. All right, it's that kind of a deal. The other thing I'd point out in terms of abilities, you don't have a big skill system in games like this, in this time period. But that doesn't mean the abilities don't matter. If you're a fighter and you have an 18 strength and you're trying to knock down a door, it makes sense for the dungeon master to say, yeah, you can do it. You're as strong as you can be. You're like Conan the Barbarian. Knock down that door, unless maybe there's some special reason why you can't. And in those cases, the idea is that the dungeon master is going to come up with simple ways for you to do stuff. But rather than having a bonus system and all sorts of different modifiers, it's really kind of up to the DM. That's why what I've used in the past for things like this is, a roll on 6. So, roll a 4 and above on a 6-sided dice. That gives you a 50% chance. And you modify that as you think makes sense. Keeps it very simple. You don't need a lot of modifiers. You can take the characters, their ability scores. You could take into account if they have some kind of player history or things they've done in the past. You can just take that into account organically and apply it to these things. Okay, so you get that. Different ones can reduce things by one thing to gain a little bit from another. Now we get the classes, which includes, in this case, the races. Okay. Now think about a lot of games nowadays, how many pages are taken up. Here's where we start with fighting men. Okay. And we go elves, halflings, and boom, right about to there. So that's how much space is taken up with these descriptions. It's kept simple. Okay. So let's read through these. Fighting men. Any human character can be a fighting man, and all halflings and dwarves are members of the fighter class, unless they opt to be thieves. Elves are a combination of fighting man and magic user, as described later. Fighting men can use any weapon and wear any kind of armor, including magic weapons and magic armor. Now, this is important because you don't have a massive list of magic weapons and armor, for one thing. And magic swords are some of the better magic weapons you can get. The fact that fighters can use swords and other classes cannot, right, helps them out. That's a special fighter ability. So keep that in mind. They cannot do other kinds of magic. However, as they advance in experience, they increase their hit dice and are harder to kill. After they reach the 4th level of experience, they also increase their ability to get hits on an opponent. But experience levels that are that high are not discussed in this book, and the reader is referred to the more complete rules in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Magic users. Humans who elect to become magic users must not wear armor and can carry only a dagger for protection. That's it, a dagger. They can, however, use almost all magical items, but not magical swords and other magical arms other than daggers. They have the advantage, shared with clerics and some elves, of being able to work magical spells. At the start, however, they can cast only one spell and must advance a level in experience before they can learn another. Thus, the magic user starts out as an extremely weak character. If he survives and rises in experience, he becomes increasingly powerful. The types of spells and the way they are used are discussed in a later section. Magic users, of course, may be either good or evil, lawful or chaotic, and most of their spells remain the same. Now, that's important because it will be different for clerics. So look at the way that's stated, though. You're going to be weak, but if you survive It's a challenge. It's hard to be a magic user, but if you're a skilled player and a smart player, you can do some really cool stuff with that class as you gain experience levels. Clerics are humans who have dedicated themselves to one or more of the gods. Depending on the god, the cleric may be good or evil, lawful or chaotic. Clerics have their own special spells, and unlike magic users, they begin with none. They may, however, wear armor, including magic armor, and carry non-edged weapons, such as the mace or the quarterstaff. No swords or bows and arrows can be employed, for the cleric is forbidden by his religion from the drawing of blood. Good clerics can often dispel the undead, skeleton zombies, and their ilk, as explained later. As they advance in experience levels, they gain the use of additional spells. Spells for evil clerics differ slightly from those of good clerics. Now, that's something they're going to kind of change over time. Primarily, I think more in like 3rd edition. Thieves are humans with special abilities to strike a deadly blow from behind, climb sheer surfaces, hide in shadows, filch items and pickpockets, move with stealth, listen for noises behind closed doors, pick locks, and remove small traps, such as poison needles. Every thief has these abilities, but as they progress in experience, they become better and better at it. And there's a table for that later. Okay. Thieves can wear nothing stronger than leather armor and cannot carry shields. They can use all the weapons of a fighting man, including magic swords and magic daggers. So that's good for thieves. Thieves above the 3rd level of experience can read magic scrolls and books and 80% of languages, so that treasure maps, etc. are easy for them. There are special rules for halflings, dwarves, and elves who wish to be thieves. These are given in advanced Dungeons and Dragons, which means you ain't doing it here. Okay. So this is where we also get some interesting changes in terms of the character races. Now, obviously, humans are just humans. Nothing special there. Dwarves are about 4 feet tall, stocky of build and weigh 150 pounds. Shoulders very broad, their skin a ruddy tan, brown, or gray. They wear long beards. They are sturdy fighters and are especially resistant to magic, as shown by their better saving throws against magical attack. They have infravision. Okay, now that's important because later editions just call it dark vision. You see in the dark, right? That's it. You just see in the dark. Infravision is infrared vision. So the idea here is you can see body heat or anything else that would be hot, warm, etc. in a dungeon. If you are well underground and it's relatively cold, right? You're not going to be able to just see in the dark, see all the features of a dungeon, etc. But this does help you with maybe you move ahead a little bit of the party because you got to get away from the torches because of the warmth. And you scout ahead and you could see the heat signature of some orcs. Of course, they might be able to see you too. But that's kind of the idea behind it. It's not meant to be sort of magical, just see everything in the dark and you don't need torches ever again. They can see 60 feet in the dark. Underground, they can detect slanting passages, traps, shifting walls, and new construction about 1/3 of the time. 1/3 of the time. How do you do that? A lot of times it'll be roll 1 to 2 on a die 6. A lot of these go for low rather than high. If you wanted it to be 5 or 6 on a die 6, you could do that too. And also keep that in mind. Being able to do that 1/3 of the time is a special ability for dwarves. So what chances would another character who's not a dwarf have to do it? You can maybe say 1 in 6. Okay. Dwarves can all speak the languages of gnomes, kobolds, and goblins. A lot of this old game is set up with like logistics and things of that nature. What languages can you speak? Because you're not supposed to just go off and kill everything that moves. You might want to talk to the kobolds and goblins. Oh, they're evil. They're evil. You might not be able to trust them, but you might want to be able to talk to them at some point. So we get to elves. Oh, you also notice no bonuses there to ability scores. But they did mention you should have a constitution of 9 or higher to be a dwarf. Now, they didn't say you had to, but you should. Elves are 5 or more feet in height, slim of build, weigh about 120 pounds, and have fair to tan skin. They can use all the weapons and armor of the fighting man, including all magical weapons, and can also cast spells like a magic user. They can detect secret hidden doors about 1/3 of the time, 1 to 2 on dice 6. They can detect I already read that. They have infravision, like dwarves. They can see 60 feet in the dark. They are not paralyzed by the touch of ghouls. That's important. That's useful. Elves can speak the languages of orcs, hobgoblins, and gnolls, as well as Elvish and the common speech they share with men, dwarves, and halflings. Thus, they have the advantages of both fighting men and magic users, as well as certain special abilities of their own. Yeah, the elves are kind of better than everybody else in the game. And that becomes more apparent in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, and at a certain point, yeah, the power gamers were usually going to be elves. Elves progress in level as both fighting men and magic users, but since each game nets them experience in both categories equally, they progress more slowly than other characters. So when you're an elf, in this version, you're basically a fighter magic user. And because you're dividing your experience points, it will generally mean you're going to be about a level behind everybody else. So when the rest of the party has leveled up to second level, you're going to probably be first. But you can do two different things, which is pretty cool. Halflings are short, 3 feet high, little folk with several special abilities. Out of doors, they are difficult to see, having the ability to vanish into woods or undergrowth. They are like dwarves in their resistance to magic. Halflings are extremely accurate with missiles and fire any missile at +1. They can use all the weapons and armor of a fighting man as long as it is cut down to their size. So again, something to remember in this game and in some of the early games, the halfling here is very much intended to be basically Bilbo Baggins. That's kind of the idea. That's where a lot of the inspiration comes from, is, for the halflings from like Lord of the Rings. The ranger class, when he shows up, and that's not in this book, the ranger is intended in its earliest version to be Aragorn, right? You're a 3rd level ranger. It means you're a 3rd level Aragorn. They're very open in that kind of borrowing. And that's why I say it's kind of gonzo. It's sort of like, Conan and Merlin and Aragorn get together with Bilbo and go on an adventure. It mixes things from other worlds. So keep that in mind. Now, in a weird way, it sort of becomes a world of its own, but that's kind of the idea behind it. If you want to do the game in a particular campaign world with lots of those kind of little details, you can certainly do that. But it's sort of designed for let everybody just be creative and do what they want and have fun. I don't mean do what they want as in ignore the rules, but just do what they want with their characters and how they depict them. Just get in there and play a game and have a good time. Don't need to take it all that seriously. So players decide what class they want their character to be and make any adjustments in prime requisite desired, yada, yada, yada. Characters can be either male or female. Character's name, class, ability scores, and other information is recorded on the separate sheet, yada, yada. We know all that stuff. There are 2 more important die rolls to be made for each character. First, generate a random number for hit points. To generate the numbers, roll the special dice in this game. Of course, this one had the chits. 8-sided, 6-sided, and 4-sided. This represents the amount of damage the character can take. For the number of hit points, roll the proper size dice mentioned below. The die pertaining to player character's type is rolled once per level of experience. Fighters, including dwarves, generate random numbers from 1 to 8. Clerics from 1 to 6. And magic users and thieves from 1 to 4. Elves use a spread of from 1 to 6, as they are both fighters and magic users. Although halflings are always fighters, they also use a 1 to 6 spread due to their size. Note that Constitution can add or subtract hit points, but no character can have less than 1 point per level, regardless of subtractions. Okay. In combat, if a character receives a blow, a dice roll will be made to determine the number of damage points inflicted. These are subtracted from the character's hit points. If his hit score falls to 0, he is dead. Hit points can be restored, if the character is alive, by a clerical healing spell, a healing potion, or some other magical item. So, at 0, you're dead. Now, does that mean the DM couldn't rule something differently based on circumstances? Of course he could. Otherwise, he must continue on in his wounded state until the game is over and he returns to the surface. Each day of rest and recuperation back home will regenerate 1 to 3 of his hit points for the next adventure. So that's not too bad. 1 to 3, not terrible. You get to higher levels, though. You take a lot of damage, you're going to be out of the dungeon for a long time. And now that gets into the logistics side of this. The longer you're gone, the more time the monsters have to, build their defenses back up, set traps for you, etc. So there is an impetus in the old game to be careful. Don't rush into combat. Don't lose all those hit points, because it may really come back to bite you in the butt if you guys have to be out of the dungeon for a month, healing up before you can go back in again. Gold owned by the character initially is determined by rolling 3 6-sided dice and multiplying the result by 10. That's the number of gold pieces owned, and that takes us into equipment and weapons. Dagger, hand axe, mace, blah, 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 blah. You get all that stuff here. This is kind of important, though. Leather armor, 15 GP. Chain type mail, 30. Plate mail, 50. Shield, 10. So the average fighter is going to have 90 to 100 gold pieces to play with. Plate mail and shield is not outside his abilities to get at first level. So a first level fighter can have a pretty good armor class, which will help him survive in combat, even though he doesn't have a ton of hit points or lots of bonuses to things. They're going to change that in later editions and make that plate mail a lot more expensive. And that's going to decrease the ability of the fighter to fight. A lot of the changes that happen to this game over time sort of hurt the fighter class. Or they take his special abilities and start giving it to all of his subclasses. Of course, if you do ability requirements, it may not matter as much, but many people would find ways around that. So we get all the equipment stuff, but you notice that's not a huge list. Very easy to go over, which means characters can be created pretty darn quickly. You're not going to spend hours buying equipment, rolling everything up. No, it's quick. Get in there, play, have fun. Additional character classes. This talks about some of the other stuff from supplements and, things you could add yourself. A centaur, a lawful werebear, blah, blah, blah. Japanese samurai fighting man. Of course, just do that just by, styling your character as a samurai. Numbers of characters. Most dungeon masters allow a player only 1 or perhaps 2 characters at a time. If a character is killed, then for the next game, the player rolls a new character. The new character, of course, starts with no experience. A character may be allowed to designate a relative who will inherit his wealth and possessions after paying a 10% tax. Hey, baby, death and taxes. On his death or disappearance. There is no reason, however, why a character could not choose to retire wealthy and covered with glory and let some fresh, hot-blooded adventurer take the risks. When a character is killed, the lead figure, if used, representing his body, is removed from the table, unless it is eaten by the monsters or carried off by his comrades to be returned to his family. Don't know that they really needed to go into that. A 7th level cleric can raise the dead, if you can find one. Also, of course, wish rings and other magic can restore the deceased adventurer to his comrades and friends. And then we get a little bit on non-player characters, okay? And that also involves hiring them, all right? And that's important to this thing. As a rule of thumb, a minimum offer of 100 gold pieces would be required to tempt a human into service. Dwarves are more interested in gold. Magic users and elves desire magic items. And clerics want some assurance of having a place of worship in which to house themselves. So you can figure that stuff out. But generally speaking, what you would probably be hiring would be like men-at-arms and something like that. We get character alignment. Okay. Now, I think in earlier editions of this, you get the lawful, chaotic, good, evil, but not lawful good, chaotic good. Okay. Here it looks like they've updated it somewhat with what you got in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. All right. What is that? What does it matter to do that kind of stuff? There's a lot that can actually play into alignment in terms of alliances, in terms of your ability to trust people. I'm trying to think if they have, do they talk in here about alignment languages? I don't think they do, but I always like that idea let's see. Speaking of said languages. Okay, I don't think they talk about it here either. Oh, yeah, they do. Okay, good. So the common tongue spoken through the continent is known by most humans, elves, dwarves, and halflings. All other creatures and monsters which can speak have their own language, although some, 20%, also know the common one. Okay, so you run into some orcs in the dungeon, there's a 20% chance they speak common. So if you don't have a character race with you that can speak to them, then you can't speak, and that could be dangerous. Lawful good, lawful evil, chaotic good, chaotic evil, and neutrality also have common languages spoken by each respectively. Oh, that's right. In this version, I'm sorry, you can be lawful good, lawful evil, chaotic evil, but not the chaotic neutral good. That's, okay, I misspoke on that one. Hey, I'm old. Give me a break. So the alignment languages. It's sort of a secret tongue. It's almost like a cult language for those who are in the lawful good alignment. Think of them as being a little more institutional and not just, oh, this is how my character feels. You're kind of like joining a faction when you're lawful good, right? Like a political party, like a religion. You get the idea. And they have their own secret tongue. Now, that's important because it means you can speak, if you're lawful good, to other lawful good creatures. And if nobody else in the party is lawful good, they don't know what you're saying. That makes for good gaming. Characters with an intelligence above 10 may learn additional languages, one language for every point above 10 in intelligence. So that's a big part of the game. You are meant to speak with monsters. Time and movement in the dungeon. Okay. This is important stuff. Fully armored man can move 120 feet per turn at a cautious walk. Each turn takes 10 minutes. Scale time, not actual. In the character's magical universe. In the player's universe, arguments sometimes develop and a turn may take considerably longer. Yes, they do. Each turn is 10 minutes except during combat, where there are 10 melee rounds per turn, each round lasting 10 seconds. So we're going to talk about that for a minute. There's sometimes an issue in Dungeons and Dragons with people's perceptions of combat. And you get this even when you're playing with people. Okay, Bob, it's your turn. What do you want to do? I'm going to swing my sword. Okay, you have 10 seconds worth of combat. You're not just swinging your sword once during that 10 seconds. So when you're attacking, there's a lot of movement going on in that 10 seconds. For example, we're bringing in the props now. We're going to bring in a couple mighty warriors here. He-Man and Man-at-Arms. So if these two are doing a round of combat, right? We're going to count this out. I actually have my phone handy with a little stopwatch over here to the side. Okay. So this is going to be 10 seconds. I think a little alarm will go off when it's done. So ready, set. Here's the beginning of the round. Okay. Round is still going on. They're still fighting. They're going back and forth. Aha, parry, thrust, etc. And there's the time. So that's how long a round of combat in this version of D&D lasts. So when you're playing the game, keep that in mind, that there's a lot of movement. There's a lot of back and forth. You're not just swinging a sword one time so that it's unrealistic. You're not. You're attacking as often as you can attack. And what that attack roll is really a measurement of how effective your attacking is during that round. Is it degrading your opponent's ability to defend themselves in a meaningful way? Every time hit point damage is scored does not mean you're drawing blood or hacking somebody. It just kind of means you're wearing them out, or you're getting closer to that moment where you get that lucky blow. The only hit point that really matters is the last hit point. When that's gone, you're dead. Okay? So if you go watch a good sword fight in a movie, there's a dandy in the Mark of Zorro, and you can find that online. There's a really good one in The Adventures of Don Juan with Errol Flynn. Count it out. watch that thing and think in terms of those 10-second rounds and see what a round of combat looks like with these two guys going at it. And then look at that moment at the very end when, there's that last hit, and the bad guy's dead. That's losing that last hit point. So when you go, we need to have a system so that every hit, it turns into some kind of you don't need that. And one of the big reasons you don't need that, well, it takes a lot of time. But another one is any system that has penalties for taking damage is going to wear more heavily on the player characters than it is on everybody else. In D&D, the NPCs, the monsters, are born to die. Okay? It doesn't matter that really to the dungeon master that you killed his manticore or you wiped out the orcs. There's more where that came from. There's no emotional attachment. It does matter when your dwarf fighter goes down or your human magic user goes down. So think about that. Before you input sort of a critical damage this and all that other stuff, those systems are usually going to be harder on the player characters than they are on the monsters. All right, so you might not want to use them. And so you get the rest here with movement and with time, etc. Time must be taken to rest, so 1 turn every hour should be spent motionless. So in other words, 5 turns out of 6, you can be moving. So you can move about 600 feet. And some people say, that's really slow. Bear in mind, you're in an underground hall. You have torchlight to guide you. There are traps potentially everywhere. Yeah, you're moving slow. You're trying to be careful. Now, you can move faster, but sometimes if you're moving faster, you don't get to roll saving throws against traps, or you are more easily surprised. Okay, so yes, it does move slow, but that's okay. That's part of it. And we get the movement table here. And it says here, since Dungeons & Dragons was originally written for wargamers who are used to miniature figures, distances are often given in inches. Inches can be converted to feet by multiplying by 10. 1 inch equals 10 feet, etc. This scales the movement appropriately for maneuvering the figures on top of a gaming table. When that was done. Didn't need a grid. You just kind of did it, freestyle. We get encumbrance, and we won't go all into that, but basically, it gives you an idea of how much you can carry without slowing you down. We get a discussion of light. Most dungeons are dark. Elves and dwarves can see 60 feet in the dark, as can all monsters, and this term embraces all of the evil characters of the dungeon master. I like that. The evil characters of the dungeon master. Again, that's the kind of game you're playing here. But it also means, like, evil humans underground are going to be able to see in the dark because they're used to it. But humans and halflings will need artificial light or be reduced to half speed or less. Magic swords and some staves shed light, but the party may have to resort to torches or lanterns. A good torch will burn for 6 turns, so 60 minutes, while a flask of oil and a lantern will last 24 turns. Either allow the bearer to see 30 feet. Artificial light, of course, will attract monsters who live in the dark and will also warn them that the party is approaching. Interesting stuff, right? And it leads to better gameplay. And there's also that logistical aspect. Are you running low on torches? If you do, all of a sudden you can't see, you're moving a lot more slowly. Maybe you're relying on the elf or the dwarf to get you out of the dungeon. That would be a bad thing for you. But it also says there's times where maybe it's a good idea to extinguish the light, so that you can sneak up on something. And then, like uncover your lantern all of a sudden when you get into combat. We have rules for trapdoors, secret doors, surprises, wandering monsters. Let's look at surprise. Surprise may occur whenever one party is unaware of the presence of the other. A roll of 1 or 2 on a 6-sided dice means the party or the monsters were surprised. If the party surprises a monster, they get an opportunity to cast a spell, shoot arrows, shut the door, run, or draw weapons and attack before the monster can react, and vice versa. A character surprised by a monster may drop whatever he is holding on a die roll of 6, and the monster gains first reaction. Okay, so that's good stuff. And with doors, you see they have to have the locks picked to be smashed open. A roll of 1 or 2 indicates the door has been forced open. Okay, of course, if the party has to hit the door several times before getting their roll of 1 or 2, there is no possibility of surprising the occupant. So you can keep rolling, right? But now, that's where, to me, if you got a fighter with an 18 strength, if I was a dungeon master, I'd probably say, with that strength, I'll give you a 1 to 4 on die 6 because you're unbelievably strong. You just kind of throw that stuff in. You don't have to be like, but it doesn't say in the rule. It's okay, man. It's okay. You're not going to unbalance everything by letting a really strong dude bust the door down quickly. Now also, when the characters come to a door, they may listen to detect any sound within. A die roll of 1 for humans, 1 or 2 for elves, dwarves, and halflings indicates that they have heard something, if there is anything to hear. Now that's important too when you're a DM. I oftentimes will roll that myself, right? Because you could do it with the players, and if they roll above whatever they're supposed to roll, they know that, well, I don't hear anything, but there could be something inside. It's kind of fun when you roll it for them. And you roll the dice. They don't know what it says. You got to be honest here. And you go, you don't hear anything. And then they go, oh, well, do I not hear anything because I failed? Or because there's nothing to hear? Adds to the danger. If elves pass by a secret door or passage, roll a 6-sided die, and a 1 or 2 means they sense something there. If the party is searching for a secret door, then an elf will locate it on a roll of 1 to 4, other characters on a roll of 1 or 2. Okay. And most of the time you get like every time you're searching, each roll represents about 10 minutes of time. So keep that in mind. If you're searching a room very thoroughly for secret doors, it could go through a pretty long amount of time. And here's the important thing about that. And this should not be forgotten. At the end of each 3 turns, so every 30 minutes, the dungeon master can roll a die to see if a wandering monster has come down the corridor. A roll of 6 means that something has come strolling along. If the party has somebody watching, they will see or hear the monster up to 120 feet away unless it is coming around a corner, yada, yada, yada. Okay, and then we get some stuff on the wandering monsters. Level beneath the surface, 1, 2, or 3. Die roll, what you roll, and that's what you get down here. Okay. So, but that's important because it keeps some pressure on the players to keep things moving. You sit around too long, for example, you go, we need to rest or something from this fight. Or we're going to search, forever until we find the secret door. You may be having to fight monsters along the way. And that's going to take down your hit points and make it more likely that you're going to die or have to get out of there. And we have here also extremely important, hostile friendly reaction table. Okay. So when you run into something, guess what? It doesn't mean they're going to kill you right off the bat. You could even get enthusiastic volunteers help. Now, it says some of these creatures will not always be hostile. Some may offer aid and assistance. Okay. And you can have adjustments for charisma. So what? An ochre jelly is not going to be enthusiastic and helpful, although it would be fun to play that way. But the idea is it's kind of mindless, right? Extremely evil things might not, like zombies, for example, are not going to necessarily be helpful. But if you run into elves, dwarves, etc., berserkers even, maybe, who knows? And if you have somebody who's very charismatic, it might help too. If the party decides to flee, they may be able to delay pursuit by discarding some of their possessions. Unintelligent monsters will stop to pick up food half the time, and intelligent monsters will stop for treasure half the time. Burning oil will also deter monsters. Yes, it would. So we get experience points and experience levels. 1 XP for every gold piece. No, that is not stupid. The game is about exploring a dungeon for treasure. So treasure gives experience points. In other words, when you score treasure, you score points. When you score points, you go up in level. That's the basic idea. If you are doing something else as your goal, you could potentially change that. But that's the way the game is meant to run because it is just a dungeon exploration game, as it's written. It's not intended for grander things at this point. And of course, you also get experience points for killing monsters based on how tough the monsters are. Okay. I forgot about this. Yeah. If the defeated monster is lower in level than the character who overcomes him, less experience is gained. The experience points for the killer multiplied by a fraction. Monster's level divided by character's level. For example, if a 3rd level fighting man killed a 1st level orc, or what we'd say a 1-hit dice orc, he generates 1/3 the experience points. The dungeon master usually takes all the experience earned by the party, treasures and monsters defeated, and divides it equally among all surviving members of the expedition. In other words, we're not doing that right after a fight. We're doing it when you guys have survived the expedition. You've gotten back out, you've gone back to town, or you're camped or whatever. The dungeon master should have the option of lowering the number of experience points gained under special circumstances. If one character sneaks out of the dungeon with all the treasure while the rest of the party is being eaten, he should gain some experience points, but not necessarily all of them. I'd probably give it to all of them, if it was a thief, for sure. Remember, the characters with high scores in their prime requisite get a bonus. Okay. So, no more experience points should be awarded for a single game that will move a character up 1 experience level, so you don't get to go up more than 1 level after a game. You get the idea. And here we get the little table for what this sort of means. For a fighter, 1st level fighter is a veteran. 0 experience points to attain that level. 1 8-sided dice for hit dice. Of course, 0 spells. That goes all the way down. 2nd level fighters are called warriors. 3rd level are called swordsmen. Takes 4,000 experience points to reach 3rd level. Magic users, medium, seer, and conjurer. I love the level titles. I did that in my own game, of course. Takes more experience to go up in level. Start with 1 1st level spell, then 2 1st level spells, and then 2 1st level and 1 2nd level at 3rd level. Clerics, acolyte, adept, and priest. 6-sided dice. They go up faster than fighters. No spells at 1st level, 1 1st level spell at 2nd level, 2 1st level spells at 3rd. Thieves, apprentice, footpad, and robber. They go up even faster. So if you want to go up in level, if you want to be 1 level ahead of everybody, be a thief. And if you have a high dex, especially, you're going to be ahead. And that's important because if you're a level ahead, you're going to have more hit points. So you're going to be a slightly better fighter in combat because you might have as many hit points as the fighters do. And then it says A, B, C. What the heck does that mean? Well, we'll find out. And then we, of course, see a little bit on dwarves, halflings, and elves there. We've already discussed that. Explanation of thief's abilities. So, at level A, at level B, at level C. So it's your chances to do things. Now, this is another important thing that kind of gets maybe misunderstood. Open lock, that's pretty obvious. It means you can open a lock. Remove a trap. Kind of makes sense. Pretty simple. Pick a pocket. Okay. Here's where it gets a little more complex. Move silently. Does that mean you're pretty quiet when you move? No, not in my opinion. It means you don't make any noise at all when you move. That's why you only have a 20% chance to do it at first level. Because you go, well, a thief should be able to sneak up pretty good. Sure, but not without any noise at all. Climb sheer surfaces, not climb walls. Climb sheer surfaces. Yes, anybody can climb a wall with handholds. You probably don't even need to roll for that. But these guys can climb sheer surfaces. So you almost don't, if you looked at it, you'd hardly even see a handhold. But these guys can do it. Think of Conan climbing up like the Tower of the Elephant. Hide in shadows. Doesn't mean you're hiding behind a curtain. It means you're literally hiding in shadows. You are, to some extent, kind of in plain sight, but they don't see you. Now, how does that interact with the ability of monsters to see in the dark? I'm not sure. We'll have to look at that. Hear noises. Roll of 1 or 2. Roll of 1 or 2. Roll of 1 to 3. On die 6. Okay. And we kind of discussed that a little bit with listening at doors earlier on, what other people can do. So they talk about how the percentage dice work here. Oh, and also, when a thief of any level strikes a blow from behind, a bonus of +4 to hit is given, and double damage is scored. Okay? So here's an example. Drago the thief tries to pick the lock on a treasure chest. He is a first level thief, so he needs a roll of 0.1% to 15% on the dice. He rolls red 3 and white 0, a 30%, and not good enough to open the lock. He is allowed only that one try, one roll of the dice to open it, because no matter how long he works on the lock, there is only a 15% chance that an inexperienced thief can get it open. Later, Drago is alone in a dark corridor when a party of evil warriors walks by. He announces that he will hide in the shadows. He rolls a red 0 and a white 2. 0, 2%, so 2%, much less than the score of 10% he needs for success. He is not seen. The thief's ability to hear noise at closed doors, secret panels, is rolled on a 6-sided die like everyone else, but his ability improves as he advances in experience. And then we get the clerical abilities, right, which is turn undead. And I think most people understand how that works. We're not going to go heavy into it. They talk a little bit about the word level because we use level for different level spells, level of character, level of dungeon. They kind of go through some of that. Magic spells. So here's your spell rules. Memorize the spells. Yes, from Jack Vance. You get the idea. And it does put some limitations, right, on the magic users of what they could do. Scrolls are written in magic runes that fade from the page as they are read. So a scroll also can only be used once. Magic users may make a scroll of a spell they already know, i.e. have in their magic book, at a cost of 100 gold pieces and 1 week's work for each spell of the first level, 200 and 2 weeks for a second level spell, etc. Certain magical items which can be found in dungeons can be used by magic users. Okay. It is also possible for a magic user, through the expenditure of much money for research, to create new spells. Okay, now think about that too. It's a cool thing. You can make up your own spell and then create it, and they kind of give some guidelines on that. One thing to remember, though, is it is to the advantage of the magic user to get a hold of spell books, scrolls, things like that, to learn spells from, rather than having to research things and figure it out on their own. That's going to be a lot more expensive. Gives you an impetus to get into the dungeon and do your work there. Based on the magic user's intelligence, percent chance to know any given spell, number of spells knowable per level, minimum, maximum. So 18 intelligence, 95% chance to know any given spell. You can know a minimum of 8 spells per level, maximum of all of them. So if you pretty average 4 and 6, that's your minimum 4, maximum of 6 spells. It limits you, and it's supposed to limit you. Okay. Saving throws. I wanted to go in on this one because saving throws have changed quite a bit over the course of Dungeons and Dragons. If you know 3rd edition, and probably the ones that come after that, even though I haven't played them, so I couldn't swear to it, they base saving throws on your ability scores. They had, at least in 3rd edition, you had fortitude, reflex, and will. Okay? So your ability to resist it was based upon the nature of the attack and what made sense for avoiding it. So Dragon Breath is a reflex because you're trying to duck out of the way of the dragon's breath, right? And your ability to do that is based very much on your class. So fighters are better at fortitude saves and wizards are better at will saves. Okay. It's very different here because your ability to save against something is really based on how dire that attack against you is. What are the consequences of the attack? It doesn't matter much of how the attack comes, although there's a little bit of that, but how dire it is. So if you look at this little chart here, the easiest saving throw, you need to roll this number or above, the easiest saving throw for every single class is Death Ray or Poison. Why is that? Because if you fail, you're dead. You're gone. You're out of the game. Okay? Now, there's different roles for different classes. Normal men, kobolds, goblins, etc. need a 13 or higher. Fighting man, thief, hobgoblin, etc. Now, why? Because hobgoblins have 2 hit dice, so they're a little higher level. 12 or better. Magic user, 13 or better. So fighters are better at saving against death than magic users. Clerics need an 11 or better. Dwarves and halflings a 10 or better. Okay? So that's the easiest thing to save against. Up next really, and we're going to ignore magic wands for a minute. Up next, turn to stone. Okay, now being turned to stone doesn't mean you're dead, but it's hard to, come back from that. So it really screws up your ability to adventure. That's next. Dragon breath. And, well, depending on the character, dragon breath is maybe even with magic spells, but dragon breath is a lot of damage. You do want to save against it for half damage, but it's not necessarily as devastating as just instant death. Same with magic spells. It depends on the spell, but they can have varying degrees of you're screwed and you're out of the game, but they do make it easiest to save against instant death. And then magic wands are easier for everybody to save against than spells by about 3 points, except for magic users. And it's interesting, magic users and clerics need a 15 or higher to save versus magic spells, or 14 and 12 against magic wands. Dwarves and halflings are better at saving against magic, though, than human magic users and clerics. So that's a special ability, and people forget that sometimes. They'll go, well, the elf has way more special abilities than... Not really. Dwarves and halflings, some of their special abilities are in those saving throws. So obviously you fail, you get the effect, or you take full damage from something like Dragon Breath. So I wanted to throw that out there for saving throws. There is a reason. It wasn't just, let's make up some cute names for things, which you do get a little bit more in revisions of it. And I think it sort of gets lost along the way. And that's why somebody at one point said, what would make a lot more sense is a reflex save against... Okay. This is about things that will take you out of the game. It's easier to save against them. All right. And we get a thing on monster saving throws. Then we get our magic user spells, the book of first level spells, book of second level spells, book of third level spells. What does that mean? It means when you become a magic user, you get your book of first level spells, and you have, as we got on this chart, a chance to know any one of those given spells. If you're average, it's about a 50% chance. Okay? But a minimum of 4 and a maximum of 6. Well, how many do we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So there's 14 first level spells. On average, you'd know 7 of them, but if you're average intelligence, you can only know a maximum of 6, right? So kind of interesting. It means not every magic user knows every spell or can know every single spell, which creates a little bit more individuality for your magic users. And then, of course, we get all the descriptions. Now, we're not going to go through all of those. Let's look at one in particular. Magic Missile, level 1, range 150 feet. That's not a lot on it, is it? Protection from evil, you get duration of 6 turns. Nice and simple. So what's Magic Missile do? A conjured missile equal to a magic arrow. And it does 1 die roll plus 1 point, 2 to 7. So when they say die roll, they usually are going to mean 6-sided dice. To any creature, it strikes. Roll the missile fire like a longbow arrow, missile fire table. Higher level magic users fire more than 1 missile. And we don't have to worry about that here because we're not going to have higher level magic users. We're only level 1 to 3. So notice this. It's not instant hit at this point. You got to roll to hit. Okay. But it does do more damage. So later they're going to make it instant, but they're going to reduce the damage. We get Tensor's floating disc. So we get some of the name spells here. Audible glamour, a little bit of illusion. You get the idea. Okay. And of course, third level spells, we get, where are we? Oh no, we don't get the third level spells here, but that's where Fireball and Lightning Bolt come in. And that's really what we're all looking for. Then we get our cleric spells. So here's another interesting thing you need to think of, and this does have impacts on how a world is designed. The book of first level spells, cure light wounds, detect evil, detect magic, light, protection from evil, purify food and water, remove fear, resist cold. You will notice cleric spells heal you, give you a little bonus maybe, protect you from things. They don't do damage for clerics. But what about evil clerics? Well, and it'll say right here, evil cleric spells. And sometimes they refer to these as anti-clerics. Evil clerics have basically the same spells as do good clerics. However, Spells in italics are reversed for evil clerics. The reverse spells are cause light wounds, detect good, darkness, contaminate food and water, cause fear, and curse. Evil clerics cannot heal wounds. Think about that, how that would work with an evil cleric and his followers. He cannot heal them. He can only hurt people. And that's something you could maybe trade to evil monsters, right? The orc, orc chieftain has been injured. You could heal him as a good cleric and maybe gain an alliance. Could be a little shaky because of the orc's alignment, but you get the idea. So the evil ones don't get to do that. It's not optional. And by the way, the good ones don't get to inflict those wounds. Combat melee. And I think most people understand how this generally works. We get the hits, based on armor class. We get the hits based on armor class for monsters. You want to roll this number or higher. You get the idea based on your level. We're not going to get super, super, super into that. But we are going to go into a few of the things here. So we do get something here on poisoned weapons. If a hit is scored by a poisoned weapon, a curare-tipped blowgun dart, the poison sting of a giant scorpion, the victim must make a saving throw against poison or paralysis, and also take the number of damage points indicated by the die roll. It is recommended that the Dungeon Master not allow players to make use of poisoned weapons in all but extreme situations, because it's a pain in the butt. And it becomes an instant kill. But then again, if the players are running around with poison weapons, maybe the orcs are too. And if there's, 6 orcs with longbows and poison arrows, that's going to be worse than you having poisoned weapons. Because there's more orcs to come. Fire. Flasks of oil can be spread on the floor of the dungeon and ignited. A pool will be 5 feet across, if circular, and the flames do 2 8-sided dice of damage to anything caught within the conflagration. That's pretty high damage. The fire burns out in 1 turn, or 10 melee rounds. So in other words, and this is kind of funny, it will actually burn out more quickly in combat than it would without combat. I don't know. Maybe we're all fanning stuff and putting it out with our fighting. If a creature is struck directly with oil, whether or not it is immediately set aflame, damage will be 1 8-sided die on the first melee round it is fire, and on the second melee round, 2 will be taken sustained. Thereafter, no further damage will be taken, as it is assumed that the oil has run off. So you can do up to 3 die 8 damage with that stuff. So flaming oil was kind of a big deal. You can throw them, etc. Now, holy water. The effects of a vial of holy water on the undead are the equivalent of a flask of burning oil on other creatures. So throw the holy water on the vampire, 1 die 8 damage the first round, 2 die 8 the second round, and then that's it. So up to 3 die 8 damage, though, which is, again, pretty darn good. And it makes you go, wait, can you spread it on the floor and have, undead walk through it and take damage? Because that'd be pretty awesome. Although maybe not. They may not have intended that. That'd be up for, the Dungeon Master. We also have here, flaming oil will not harm such non-corporeal monsters as wraiths and specters. It will harm skeletons, zombies, ghouls, wights, and mummies, although it will do only half normal damage to the last 2 named. So half damage against wights and mummies. Similarly, monsters which normally use fire weapons, such as red dragons, fire giants, and hellhounds, are not harmed by flaming oil. In other words, immunity to fire. Here we get missile fire, short range, medium, long range, based on the weapon being used. We get rules for cover, which is pretty easy. If somebody's partially exposed, -2 to hit, not too difficult. Figures behind high walls firing through arrow slits or concealed in woods are very hard to hit, subtract 4. Okay. And something to think about. Attacking from behind, +4. Somebody's very concealed, -4. Kind of gives you the range for what you're probably working with on bonuses or penalties to attacking. Probably -4 to +4. If you're having to rule on the fly, you want to probably stick between there somewhere. Always keep that in mind when you're looking at these kind of rules to get an idea of what's intended, the kind of ranges that are intended. We get magic weapons. We get the combat rounds, time and movement. Okay, 10 rounds of combat per turn. Each round is 10 seconds. So a combat turn is shorter than a regular turn. Is there a reason for that? Well, it probably comes down to using spells and things like that. They're going to probably get rid of, not probably, they are going to get rid of that in later editions to make it a little bit more obvious. But timekeeping is important in this game because of the logistics aspect. Who gets the first blow, i.e. initiative? Now, this is interesting because it's different from what we're used to later on. When two figures are brought into position 10 scale feet or less apart, they may engage in melee. The character with the highest dexterity strikes first. If the dungeon master does not know the dexterity of an attacking monster, he rolls it on the spot. So vampire attacks, what's his dex? Roll it, 3 dice 6. Oh, he's got a 12. Okay. Which, by the way, that means on average, most monsters are going to be, well, average. So if you have a higher dexterity, more often than not, you're going to be attacking first in combat. Subject to the limitation of heavy weapons, the two figures exchange blows in turn until the melee is resolved. If dexterities are within 1 or 2 points of each other, a 6-sided die is rolled for each opponent, and the highest score gains initiative. So 17 dex versus 18 dex, you roll for initiative on a 6-sided dice. All right. And then you get attackers who surprise, etc., get the first blow all the time. You don't have to roll for initiative. The parry. A player may elect to have a character parry an attacker's blow. He must announce he is doing so before the opponent strikes. The parry subtracts 2 from the attacker's die roll. So, if you want to parry instead of attacking, you get basically a -2 penalty to your opponent's attack. Melee resolution. Conquer, withdraw, surrender, or die. I love that. A character in melee may withdraw from combat if there is space beside or behind him to withdraw into. His opponent gets a free swing at him as he does so, with an attacker bonus of +2. All right. And shields do not count as protection when withdrawing. A losing combatant may offer to surrender. His opponent does not have to accept the offer, of course. Non-human monsters are often too unintelligent to consider such an offer. If an opposing figure is killed or withdraws, the attacker may advance or pursue immediately if the player desires, or he may take some other action. And we get examples here, a couple of them. And we're not going to go through all of that. But look, it's meant to be fluid. It's meant to have a little bit of creativity in it, how you describe things. You got to think your way through combat. And if you're going to go into combat, you really need to use strategy, use tactics, give yourself the best opportunity to get through it without taking a lot of damage. As some of the older players of the game would say, once we actually had to start rolling dice for combat, we kind of already had lost because you knew somebody's going to get taken down or it's going to seriously curb your ability to explore. And now we get to the monsters. Oh, we're not going to read through all these, but you get the idea. And, Bandit, for example, move 120 feet per turn, hit dice 1, armor class variable, typically armor class 6, treasure type A, alignment, 25% lawful evil, 25% chaotic evil, 50% neutral. Attack 1, damage 1 to 6 points. And that's basically what you're going to get for all of these different monsters. Again, short and sweet. You get ideas here about what bandits will be armed with. Basilisk, berserkers, black puddings, blink dogs, bugbears, displacer beast is in here. You get a really good supply of monsters. Here's your dragon. Look at this. I mean, think about it. Now, dragon does go from here to here, but that's a lot less space than you need to describe dragons in a lot of other editions. At this point, we have white, black, red, and brass. And that's all they're giving you here. So no gold dragons, but we get brass. Interesting. The breath weapon, cold, acid, fire, or sleep and fear. The shape of the breath weapon, the hit dice. Okay. So description in Age of Dragon, very young, value of hit dice and breath weapon, 1 hit point per die. So what that means is a very young red dragon, okay, will have 9 to 11 hit dice. So a small one has 9, medium 10, large 11. So let's do a small, very young dragon, red. He's going to have 9 hit points, which by the way means dragons are within the possibility of a first level party, which is kind of cool. Over time, they keep making dragons into basically Godzilla. And the idea was, no, you could take on a dragon, but not an ancient one and not a large ancient one. You could do it. You had a chance. So he'd have 9 hit points, and his breath weapon does 9 points of damage. So if you saved, cut that in half. And if you round up, that'd be 5. If you rounded down, it'd be 4. I guess you'd round up because you wouldn't want to have it do 0 necessarily. So there you get the idea of how that works. And so dragons are on the table for early, or low-level parties. So dwarfs, elves, fire. I love these dwarves. I love the art in these old editions. I love this. Oh, that's so great. Tom Wham, TW. It shows you that this is not meant to be necessarily the most epic, amazing thing in the universe. It's a fun game. It can be taken more seriously, but it can also be taken less seriously, and you can have goofy names for your characters. Matter of fact, my daughter is playing Dungeons & Dragons right now with a bunch of friends while I'm doing this video, and her character is called Moon Unit because they're a group of people who like to have fun and they don't worry too much about it. So we get the giant types here. Ooh, someday I'm going to go through the book where a lot of that comes from. Here's some great stuff from Sutherland, fighting some harpies. Here we have Hydra. Okay, so you get a really good variety of monsters, and yes, some of them probably too powerful for the players, for the characters in this game, 1 to 3rd level, 1st to 3rd level, I should say. But see, a lot of dungeons, you could get to lower levels before you're ready, right? It's not, the safeties are off on old dungeons. So a, 1st level party, if they're not real smart, could end up on the 4th level of a dungeon and in way over their heads. And then it's going to become a matter of survival, almost like, watching Alien or something like that. Because, for example, vampire, right? So vampires have 7 to 9 hit dice. Okay, even a 3rd level party might have some trouble with that. But a good-sized 3rd level party, on the other hand, if they have holy water, if they have flaming oil, they might just be able to take that vampire out. They might lose a few people, but they could do it. So after the monsters, we get the treasure. We get the treasure chart, treasure type A through T. You roll for each category, thousands of copper, thousands of silver, thousands of electrum, thousands of gold, thousands of platinum. Obviously, gold pieces, platinum pieces. And yes, we had the electrum piece back in the day, and they talk about what they all represent. And we get gems and jewelry, and we get maps or magic. So, some of these treasure types, and there is something smart about the treasure types. Rather than it just being everything scaling according to the monster's, power, their hit dice. The treasure types let you sort of say, look, some monsters have hoards. Some of them don't. Some of them just have pocket change, right? You get the idea. So you have a little bit. So if you're a dungeon master designing a monster, you'd want to look at the treasure types to think about what makes sense for that particular monster to have in their lair. And of course, that's where the treasure is. The wandering monsters, one of the bad things about them is you're not going to get any real treasure off of them. So you're just having to fight for nothing. All right. Magic items, dice roll. This might be copied out of an old book. It might not. That looks really familiar to an old book I have sitting on my shelf that I'm not going to grab. Magic swords. Only fighters and thieves get to use those. Sword +1, sword +1, +2 against lycanthropes. Sword +1, flaming, +2 against trolls, +3 against undead. You get the, cursed as well. Okay. So the best sword is the sword +3. Now, and this is why this is sort of a special ability for fighters, because clerics, for example, can't use swords. All right. So what could they maybe use? Well, let's see. No arrows, no bow, no dagger, warhammer. The only magic item that a cleric can really use is a +1 warhammer. Not a +3 sword, a +1 warhammer. That's something special for fighters and to a certain extent thieves, although thieves don't have the armor that a fighter has. So they can't wade into battle the same way a fighter can. They got to be a little more careful. +3 sword, though, with a backstab, that's pretty good. You get potions, you get miscellaneous items. Not a ton here, but obviously the easiest thing in the world is to add various forms of magic treasure and magic items. Then we get all the explanations of them. We're not going to go through all of that. Dungeon mastering is a fine art, so we do get a little bit of, explanation for how to do stuff. We get this awesome little cross-section of a dungeon. Let's bring that a little closer up to the screen. Stone mountain. And you can see the pit will take you all the way down to 6th level, right? And, there's other ways you could skip levels. And again, one of the reasons for that is be careful going down if you're a low-level party, but also if you're a high-level party, you don't have to go back all the way through everything. You could take the pit down. I suppose if you had like levitation or something, or a magic carpet, go right down to the 6th level and then hit the domed city on the 7th level. That is, by the way, really, really awesome. And you notice that's a skull, that entrance. And so we get an example of play, the Dungeon Master, the Caller. Yeah, you had a caller, you had a mapper. And to be honest with you, that's not a bad way to play. And the reason is not to limit what players can do, but to force the players to get together, discuss what they want to do, and then the caller tells you. So the players are more likely to actually work in tandem with one another, rather than just everybody scattering and doing something different. And here we get a nice bit. The imaginary universe of Dungeons & Dragons obviously lies not too far from the Middle Earth of J.R.R. Tolkien's great Lord of the Rings trilogy. The D&D universe also impinges on the fantasy worlds of Fritz Leiber, Robert E. Howard, Gardner F. Fox, classical mythology, and any other source of inspiration the Dungeon Master wants to use. And we do get a sample dungeon in this one. Very nicely drawn. It goes over what's in all of these places. There's a 4th level magic user in there. He knows 6 spells. Okay, very nice. And so that's something that you right off the bat with this book, you can have everybody go through a little sample dungeon. And you notice here, Lemunda the Lovely. She's a prisoner as a girl, Lemunda the Lovely, whose father is a powerful lord in the city above. Lemunda is a good fighter in her own right and carries a concealed dagger in her girdle. But right now, no, that's not like the girdles. It's a different kind of girl. But right now she is bound and gagged. And so you get her strength 10, intelligence 14, wisdom 12, constitution 15, dex 12, charisma 17. She's a looker. Level 2, hit dice 2. And there was at one point the idea that you would re-roll your hit points at the beginning of every game. Something different, huh? You don't do that nowadays. Hey, not a bad idea though, because that way, rather than like you go up in level and you roll and you end up with 1 hit point, especially as a fighter, you're like, oh crap. And you're stuck with it. If you're re-rolling every game, well, some games you're more on, on the ball and you're harder to take out. Other ones, maybe a little worse, but it'll kind of average out. And then we get a few things here, like the cost of this and the cost of that, and some tables you would use. That is the basic set. Now, we're not going to go through the module that's included because that will take too much time. And we've been at this already for an hour and a half. But I hope this is useful for folks who are trying to understand the game a little bit better. We're going back to the origins here with the Holmes basic game. I'm going to do further videos that kind of go through some of the others. And good Lord, if I'm going through advanced D&D, it's going to take some time. But we'll see how things have changed over time. But it's important, I think, the first few times you're playing a game to stick to the rules more or less as they are written. So you understand how everything fits together. And then if you want to make changes later on, you can do that, but keeping things somewhat in balance. You don't want things to get way out of balance because then all of a sudden, if you say, well, I think elves should be able to shoot laser beams out of their eyes. Well, you could do that. Then everybody's going to want to be an elf. And you're going to be lacking. And if somebody ends up being a cleric, they're going to be like, why can't I shoot laser beams out of my eyes? You want to keep things sort of steady. Let's throw in He-Man and Man-at-Arms here. Oh, by the way, let's see. Oh, look at that. How strong I am. I just dented his armor just like that. But hopefully this gives you an idea of the origins of the game, what it's intended to do, why a lot of these things work the way they work, maybe a better way to imagine them in melee combat, for example. of there's a lot of movement in that round of combat. And keep that in mind when you're playing. You know, you don't have to just, oh, I'm going to swing my sword at the orc and try to kill him. You could also be doing stuff like, I'm going to try to back the orc, you know, into this tunnel. And that will make it possible for us to do X, Y, and Z. And these are things the DM can take into account. Everything in this game is not so rigidly laid out. Well, let's see. If you do that, you need to make this roll and that roll and the other roll. No, the DM could simply say, okay, well, if you hit this round, we'll say instead of doing damage, you back the orc where you wanted him to go. Or you could say, well, okay, if we'll put a penalty on your attack roll, and if you make it, you'll do damage and you'll back him up. It's up to the DM, but there's a lot more freedom. So think like that when you're playing the game. Don't just look at your character sheet and say, this is what I'm allowed to do. Be creative. The wonderful thing about these rules-light games is they're a lot more open in that regard. Now, it might be a little tougher for a starting DM, but they'll learn on the job, right, and get better as they go. But an experienced DM should be able to run these things and do a lot of stuff on the fly and not have to worry about legions of rules. Keep the game fair. Keep it fun. Keep it moving, and you're going to do okay. So I hope you enjoyed this little look at Holmes Basic D&D. We'll have more of these coming in the future on this channel. If you have any comments, I'd love to hear them. And if you have, here's how we used to rule this, here's how we used to do it, that's awesome too. Remember, there's really no wrong way, unless you've twisted the rules up to the point where nobody can get any fun out of it or things are just not working. That's probably the wrong way. But other than that, tailor it to your own group's needs. And if everybody is engaged and having fun during the session, you're doing okay. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like, maybe subscribe, maybe share with a friend. Until next time, God bless everybody. Please be kind to one another. Have a little bit of fun out there. And I will see you hopefully soon in Dad's Den of Pop Culture. Bye-bye.